Well, it is the Marrakech edition of the policy with Leah, and we are reaching you right here from Morocco. This is the annual meetings of the World Bank and the IMF returning to Africa 50 years after. Policymakers, decision makers, opinion shapers are all converged here, and Africa is at the heart of discussion. Despite a devastating earthquake in this country, it has been able to bring together people from all around the world and has been hosting peacefully and, of course, soundly. My name is Leah Tunde, welcoming you to the policy, and we shall return after this break. We begin the show with major happenings that shaped the economy in the course of the week.
The International Monetary Fund (IMF) has downgraded Nigeria's projections for this year and next despite sub-Saharan Africa seeing greater projections than the developed economies. It says Nigeria will slow down to 2.9% this year and inch up to 3.1% by 2024.
So on sub-Saharan Africa, we have a slight downward revision for the region as a whole. I mean, we're expecting growth at about 3.3% this year, and that's a 0.2 percentage point downward revision. There's a slight downward revision also for next year to about 4%.
For Nigeria, in particular, we have a growth forecast that goes from 3.3% this year to 2.9% next year, before going up to 3.1% in 2024. There's a downward revision for this year. Partly this is because of the demonetization, the high inflation, the shocks to agriculture and hydrocarbon output. That's coming on top of those external headwinds. I would also add that President Tinubu has moved quickly with important reforms, including ending the fuel subsidies and unifying the official exchange rate. We welcome these initial bold reforms because we see them as paving the way towards stronger and inclusive growth.
The group of 24 economists has put forward a position that there is a need for reform of the multilateral system to address global challenges at the annual meetings of the World Bank and IMF holding in Marrakech, Morocco. They noted that the global economic landscape is uncertain, with many countries affected by declining access to and tight external finance conditions, high debt levels, and rising inflation. The group welcomed the United Nations Secretary General's inclusive and effective tax reform agenda and called for a multilateral consensus to drive enduring progress on the initiative, as it would foster a more just and balanced international tax system.
The food shock window was supposed to be a temporary facility that ought to expire sometime this year, but as part of the concern about the persistence of food shock, persistence of inflation, the IMF board did come to an agreement to extend the window. So that then gives more countries the opportunity to qualify and use the window. So that's, and we are happy with that as G24, because many of our countries are, impacted by high food prices, and some of them are using the window, and some of them are using other forms of facilities.
Nigeria's central bank has denied allegations that its digital currency, the e-naira, is a threat for financial stability. The bank, in a statement signed by the Director of Corporate Communications at the bank, Dr. Issa Abdulmumin, attributed the misunderstanding to some articles in the bank's recently released Economics of Digital Currencies, a book of readings. A recurring theme in the book is the interest of regulators, such as CBN, in the role of cryptocurrencies as speculative investments and the potential threat they harbor for financial stability. Pursuant to that, the articles in the book provide an in-depth understanding of CBDCs generally and the workings of the e-naira in particular, highlighting issues and challenges in implementation and adoption, the statement adds. The statement also reads, E-Naira structure continues to evolve and undergo modifications targeted at improving the user experience across all interfaces, and encourage Nigerians to embrace the technology for, amongst other things, greater financial inclusion. Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited (NNPCL) has again become the sole importer of petrol because local private firms are unable to obtain foreign currency. Mele Kyari, chief executive, disclosed this early this week, 4 months after imports were opened up to private players. Kyari also said the government have not reintroduced a decades-old petrol subsidy scrapped at the end of May. Despite concerns from investors of a de facto return as pump prices have not moved since July, even as there has been a more than 30% rise in oil prices.
It's been a mixed bag of reactions and discussions right here in Marrakech with policymakers, decision shapers, the business community, and just everyone who matters around the globe is converged here. Morocco, the experience has been, as I mentioned earlier, a tremendous one. What does Africa need to do to be at par with her peers on other continents? And how can Africa rewrite her history and turn her story around? Ajay Banga, the president of the World Bank, has been speaking to some of these issues, and here is what he had to say for Africa and African leaders.
It is correct that close to half of our volume of lending goes into the African continent. It is also correct that this is after 50 years, I believe, that the annual meetings are being held on the soil of Africa. My belief is that the level of growth of population in Africa over the coming years and the opportunities that Africa represents, therefore, for world growth are second to none. The question really is, how do we surmount the unbelievable challenges that exist on the ground in Africa to enable that to become something more? And that includes everything from very simple things that people outside don't understand, but those of you who live here do. The ability to transport goods across African borders within Africa is unbelievably complicated. It is cheaper to take something from an African country to a completely distant offshore port to bring it back to an African country than it is to move that produce or that product from one African country to the other across their own borders on the continent. That has everything to do with logistics, but also to do with the simplicity of documentation across borders. There's so much work to be done on that. There is the African Free Trade Commission that the bank is an active supporter of. I've said this to African finance ministers. I believe this topic deserves much more attention. You cannot solve it for the continent as a whole, but you can solve it by starting by smaller regions in the continent, looking at how you can promote intra-regional trade in Africa. Just one example, to create jobs for young people. There are other issues to do from the basics of education and healthcare, including skilling institutes as the children grow, so they get a chance to be skilled appropriately for the kind of jobs that could be created in that country. That's another thing to be done. In the middle of all this is the challenges of climate and pandemics. And climate, as we talked a little bit at the beginning, so I won't repeat that. Pandemics, it's not just the access to vaccines that we all unfortunately saw firsthand during the COVID situation. I believe the correct long-term answer for access to medication and devices in Africa is for making those things in Africa for Africa.
Leading the Nigerian delegation is Wale Edun, the Minister of Finance and Coordinating Minister for the Economy. Nigeria has just assumed the chairmanship of the Board of Governors of the Sub-Saharan African Caucus. He also speaks on the wish list he came with on behalf of the economy.
Nigeria has the leadership of the African Governors Forum within the World Bank Group. It is Nigeria that will help to set the agenda and push the case, for instance, for a third member of the board of governors from sub-Saharan Africa. There are 2 from Africa currently, and we think the third one should come from sub-Saharan Africa, so that we have a bigger voice in the governance, we have more representation in the board of the World Bank Group and the IMF. I think it's not so much the issue of any kind of debt forgiveness. The issue is that Nigeria is very much the narrative, particularly from investors. There's a very good vibe, there's a very good buzz, and there's a lot of interest in the Nigerian economy, in the reforms that are currently being undertaken, and of course in the investment opportunities that the largest economy in Africa, the largest population in Africa, the most youthful population in Africa has to offer. In addition to that, of course, are the resources that are on the ground. So when you put all that together, after perhaps China, India, Nigeria is the next largest economy that is being sought after as an investment destination. And what it takes is for the country to be ready to attract that investment, to turn the initial interest into investments in agriculture, in solid minerals, in industry, in manufacturing, in import substitution. These are all the areas where there is interest in coming to Nigeria and investing by foreign direct investment and investors generally, and I would say including those that are already in Nigeria.
And of course, the issues of inclusion were also at the front burner during this meeting, and Nigeria went fully armed with her community, especially in the creatives and of course the information industry, the sector services that has been doing tremendously well when you look at Nigeria's GDP. Let's get to find out from them, and of course, they're women.
Statistics tell us that by the year 2050, 1 in 4 people in the world will be an African. The median age of an African is 19. That means we have the youngest population on Earth. Therefore, we are going to be needed very much by the rest of the world, because without us, the world is unlikely to be able to exist in isolation. Numbers also tell us that $700 billion will be created, will be revenue from the digital economy by the year 2050. So this is a gradual process. So you can see that these numbers are going to be happening over the next few years. The film and audiovisual industry will generate 20 million jobs by 2050. $20 billion per annum in revenue will be generated by the year 2050. So my point is that this is not a charity case. This is a business case. And therefore, we need to make sure, as Africans, that we are ready for the potential that has been projected for us. There are certain things that we need to do to ensure that we can make sure that this 700 billion investment and revenue generation happens, that the 20 million jobs do get created, that we do make the 20 billion per annum as forecasted. There are certain things we need to do to achieve this, and we must be ready to do them. So access to funding is absolutely critical. Capacity building, it doesn't seem to matter what the sector is, be it my sector, be it banking, be it the arts, be it the visual, it really doesn't matter, you know, technical, legal, we all seem to have a lack of capacity building on the continent. We need to invest heavily in capacity building and making sure that our people, and especially this median age youth that we are grooming, have the right skills. We need to build global stars. And when I say global stars, it's not just a star, a person that's on television. It's about whatever the talent happens to be, whatever the field they're in. We've seen this happen around the world. We need to invest in our global stars on the continent. It doesn't really matter what profession they're doing. But of course, today we're talking about Africa Creates, so we do need to make sure that we have shining stars that are actors, shining stars that are directors, shining stars that are producers and writers and so on and so forth, because that is what demands and that is what creates revenue and drives monetization democratization?
I think music is a very strong cultural tool for even business. I was on the forum last year, the Doha forum, and we were talking about African investments. And one of the private venture, the venture capitalists was saying that they can connect and increase in the investment in Africa with Afrobeat. Because you see, people are not thinking about Africa now as a place of poverty, a place of, let's give them some, because it's selling the image. And when you think about the US, for example, we all know the US because of entertainment, let's be honest.
Absolutely.
Right? All we know about Times Square is we saw a movie and they said Times Square.
Absolutely.
So we have the opportunity to sell ourselves, sell our culture, and sell a new narrative. Because you see, your perception affects your reception.
Absolutely.
If you're not perceived correctly, then you will not be received with open arms. So that opens the door for Africa, for businesses, and for creatives, no doubt. I think that it's a time to, one of the things I've heard for years is that, we don't really understand the industry. And I always ask, how do you understand how oil is lifted from some subterranean thing and is pulled out, and you understand that you fund all those things, right? And what has changed now is that with streaming, you can see the numbers, you can see how much has been generated, and this is the right time to put the money into it. Because it's not a cultural tool, it's not just a cultural tool. There's something about music that represents the soundtrack of your life. At every moment of your life, there's a song that properly punctuates something that happened to you. And this is what we're pursuing. Legacy, jobs to young people, and more importantly, because we have such a huge young population, we need to keep them engaged. Music is one of those engagement tools.
When I just started my business that time, I started very small, and unfortunately for me, my country underwent some sort of economical change, and there was a lot of a problem that time for us in our country. But I suddenly realized that I was offering values that consumers were looking for at that time, and before I knew what was happening, the demand for my products went beyond my production capacity. So I decided that it was very important for me to scale up, and I needed money to be able to do that. But unfortunately for me, there was no money for me, especially because I was a startup at that time. So I tried to approach a lot of banks and all of that, but again, I faced the constraint of funding because a lot of banks require collateral that I did not have. So luckily for me, along the line, I applied to a loan that was targeted at women entrepreneurs, and this loan was approved to me based on my cash flow instead of the collateral that was being asked. And this access to this funding now enabled me to be able to expand my business and create more jobs. And this has seen me grow my staff strength from the 7 staff that I had at startup, and over the years we have been able to have well over 400 staffs. And today we have about 4 production factories where we operate. I also realized we're not just creating employment directly, indirectly also, I also realized that we're creating a lot of job opportunities for women.
The passion we have for the industry, Nigerian women are very fashionable, that also helps. But of course, we know that there's lack of skilled labor. People that sometimes we have to import fashion, which is why some of our prices tend to be a little bit on the high side. But we're hoping, as we're here at IMF World Bank Summit and speaking and what Abudu has put together for Africa Creates, and myself being one of the panelists, I spoke about challenges. And I'm hoping that there will be much more, scaling. We lack funding, being that the fashion industry is seen as a global, there's a lot of revenue to be generated. It's a lucrative business, but at the end of the day, it shouldn't be seen as a hobby. We see it as a proper business today. So we also urge those in the fashion industry to please, put their business plans together, put a proper structure together. So when the investors come, when there is time for them to see us as people that would give them the return on investment, we should look into the fashion industry, because it's the continent is looking at us. The African continent is huge.
And because we're still talking women and how the policies are affecting them and the environment, of course, for them to thrive, it is imperative to note that Morocco has set a very, very fundamental example for the continent to follow. Morocco has made it possible for their women to compete equally and, of course, on the same pedestal and with the same opportunities available for them in public office.
I wish to emphasize the unparalleled commitment of His Majesty King Mohammed VI to fostering gender equality and advancing women's rights. His early reforms, particularly the progressive amendment of what we call the Mudawana, the Moroccan family law, in 2004, marked a turning point for our nation's women. By bolstering women's rights in areas like marriage, sometimes they divorce, and in inheritance, King Mohammed VI's visionary leadership set the stage for gender parity. This revolutionary step not only reshaped the Moroccan legal landscape, but also its societal fabric, underscoring the significance of empowering women. Continuing on this legacy, his vision has paved the way for groundbreaking reform, which upcoming project promising a new generation of rights of women, and we will have a new project within 6 months. To highlight some achievements, our national fabric boasted of 6 women ministers, almost 100 women in the parliament, 4 major institutions led by women, and so many others, women, great women in Morocco. Beyond the numbers, women are integral contributors in various governmental and non-governmental capacities. These milestones result from our comprehensive approach beginning with our 2011 new constitution, ensuring gender equality across the board. Our nation has prioritized gender equality for sustainable development, a cornerstone for ensuring women increase autonomy and participation in our nation progress. To further enhance the economic condition of women, we've advanced women's rights, improving access to employment and promoting female entrepreneurship. The annual meetings 2023 in Marrakech presents a golden opportunity to center the discussions on women's significant role in Africa's impressive growth story over the past decade.
My name is Audu Maikori.
Keep watching the policy with Leah.
It aims to provide policymakers an opportunity to explain their policies in a way that members of the public affected by those policies can understand and engage with those policies.
Keep watching the policy with Leah.
Our education segment Simplified is next, and from there we go to the market square. This is where we end this episode of the program. Don't forget, you can follow us on our various social media platforms, and you can also have a hand on this episode on our YouTube channel. The program returns next week. My name is Leah Babatunde, signing out right here in Marrakech. See you next week, and God bless Nigeria.